privilege of talking identity to you guys. And I must admit, about 10 years ago, I started talking about identity because I was afraid of large audiences. And what a mistake that was, because now it seems that identity is everywhere, identity is hot, and even this room is filled up. Well, we got some seats left, so that's cool. So today, what I'm going to talk about is identity. Let me first introduce myself, because I am from the Netherlands. I work for a relatively small IT partner, Microsoft partner, SCCT, and I've been doing Active Directory, Azure Active Directory since 2006. So yeah, I think I know what I'm talking about. I'm an enterprise mobility MVP since 2009. That used to be a directory services MVP. And I also talk to guys at Veeam and guys and gals at VMware. And what I'm going to talk about today is just the 6 items that most people don't get about Azure Active Directory and Active Directory. So first I'm just going to show you the groundwork. So what's hybrid identity all about? What's up with Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, and how can you combine them? And what are the best practices? Or actually, well, Microsoft doesn't do best practices anymore. Microsoft tells you recommended practices now, because it depends on your organization size, your vision, mission, stuff like that, your strategy. So we're going to talk about recommended practices, like multi-factor authentication. And I'm not just going to show you how to do multi-factor authentication, and I'm not just going to show you single sign-on. Single sign-on is really silly to demo anyway. It's like, look, nothing happens. So I'm going to demo the other 4 stuff, which is attribute-based access control, because that's what we want. Under the covers, everything still groups, everything still access control lists and access control entries, but we can do attribute-based group memberships. And that's fun. We can do conditional access beyond what we're doing today on premises, which is really powerful. And I'm going to show you how to automate and delegate access reviews. So you as admins no longer have to do that tedious task. Let product owners do that. Let application owners do that. And of course, I'm going to talk about self-service problem solving, because we're the admins, okay, but service desk people have a hard life too. So let's help those out too. Let's start off with a bit of ground work, because what we're talking about is one identity platform. You already have one identity platform, probably, if you have Active Directory domain services. About 93% of organizations have Active Directory or Azure Active Directory. Startups, yeah, it's a bit silly, right? If you're a startup, you don't say, you know what, let's buy 1,200 euros of server hardware, arisen. Let's put it in a cupboard. Let's remove the carpet, put some tiling in so it doesn't become a vacuum cleaner. So startups don't do that. Startups just say, you know what, I think $18 a month per user is a pretty good deal. Let's do that. And then they scale up to 200, 250 thousands of users, just like that. Just pay per user per month. And if you accidentally, of course, reduce in numbers, that's okay too, because you still pay per user per month. It's not that you have a big Exchange server cluster that's just sitting there doing nothing anymore because nobody's mailing anymore. No, it's just the servers that you pay for as you go. And the biggest servers that you get if you do anything Microsoft Cloud is Azure Active Directory. And the popular, well, I think Sammy can make it a meme if he wants to, but Azure AD is neither Azure nor AD. So it's not completely Azure. It's not in all data centers. It's not in all regions. It's not in all locations. It has its different setups, different characteristics, just like Exchange Online has. And it's not AD either, because you can join a computer to AD by just doing domain join, but you can't do, well, exactly that. with Azure Active Directory. And of course, they've added the hybrid AD join, hybrid Azure AD join, the Azure AD join, and stuff like that in the last 2 years. But basically, what it was when it first started out was just a large, scalable AD LDS hosted instance. But it's Azure Active Directory. It's cloud-based. It's an identity and access management solution, IAM. It's got directory services. It's got, well, something that is close to resembling some sort of an identity governance platform. There's a lot of stuff that's currently being developed in that area with Azure Active Directory. It's not complete. And so I'm only showing you some of those identity governance features, the ones that work, the ones that we deploy at our customers, the ones that we enjoy as an organization. And the other stuff, I basically don't talk about those. You have to keep something for next year, right? And of course, there's application access management. We're going to talk about that. And it's a rich standards-based platform for developers. And that's a big deal, because Active Directory, even LDAP, even all those stuff that you talk to Active Directory, is not the open standard anymore. Microsoft has been, what do they call it? Embracing, extending those open standards, making them their own, so they could add value to those. And it means that Active Directory has its own specific way of communicating back to you. Azure Active Directory is completely open standards. And it's funny because Microsoft is one of the biggest contributors to all those open standards these days. So now they're giving it back. Now they're saying, you know what, even if you have some other cloud-based directory, even if you have some open source ADFS, even if you have open source whatever, it will communicate with Azure Active Directory if it uses the open standards that we're using. SAML, WSFET, SCIM, OAuth2, FIDO2, stuff like that. There's a lot of twos, right? Yeah, there's a lot of twos. They do get it wrong the first time, most of the time. But if you have Azure Active Directory, and if you have Active Directory, and you combine them, and I'll show you how, then you get all the benefits of single sign-on. Now, your users no longer have to enter credentials. Think about this as a prime example. Your marketing department probably uses social media. They probably use Twitter as a group. Twitter doesn't do a lot of fancy stuff in terms of identity. What they do is you have username, password, and if you want to, multifactor authentication, or actually two-step verification. Now, if a person from your marketing department leaves, we have to reset the password on Twitter, LinkedIn, all those other social media, because the person that left knew all those passwords. And multifactor authentication in a team is not that convenient. So what we're doing with Azure Active Directory, and it's one of these 3 types of applications that you can add. Twitter you can add as a password-vaulted application. So what you're doing is you store the username and password for Twitter in Azure Active Directory. And then you add a tile for Twitter to the access panel, to portal.office.com. You can even put it in a waffle if you want to. That's the menu in the left top corner in the Office 365 portal. You can do all that stuff. And the only thing that a marketing person has to do is click on the tile. Azure Active Directory does its magic under the covers, and boom, here's your Twitter. No one from the marketing department has to know the password. Azure Active Directory knows the password. And if that isn't mind-blowing, Azure Active Directory will even try and change the password every 30 days. So even if the password is compromised in one way or another, then the window of time where you can actually use those credentials is limited too. It's all the tricks that Azure Active Directory for cloud-based applications has up its sleeve. And I'll show you how to put people in groups, but you already know how to do that in Active Directory. If you just sync up your groups from AD on-prem to Azure Active Directory, boom, they're there. The marketing department, find marketing department. Twitter, there you go. It's that easy. And the tool that you want to use is Azure AD Connect. And I'm specifically using this screen from the Azure AD Connect wizard. This is a screen that you get if you do not use Express settings. Express settings is really cool because you install the app, 4 clicks later, it's done, and it's synchronizing between Active Directory on-prem and Azure Active Directory. With default settings. Default settings means password hash synchronization, which is the stupidest acronym ever. Its acronym is PHS, but it's actually synchronization of the hash of the password. But I think SHHP wasn't that catchy or something. It's not your hash. It's not the hash of the user's objects in Active Directory that are synchronized. No, Azure Active Directory gets that, well, MD4 hash to be exact, and it pulls it 1,000 times through AES 256. That should probably do it. So even if you have password hash sync, there's a hash on the other side in Azure Active Directory. And let me just paint a picture of that scale. There's password hashes for about half of Microsoft's tenants, so Microsoft Azure AD organizations. So there's about 10 million organizations with their password hashes in Azure Active Directory. That makes it a really prime target for attackers. So Microsoft has thought that through and said, you know what, probably we shouldn't just put hashes from on-premises environments straight into Azure AD. If the platform is at one point of time compromised, what you'll see is that now we've got 10 million compromised environments. Probably we should make sure that that doesn't happen. So that's password hash synchronization. There's pass-through authentication as well. It uses the Azure Service Bus, which is really cool. Azure Active Directory just puts authentication requests on the Azure Service Bus, and then PDA agents in your environment pick up those authentication requests and process these with your on-premises Active Directory. Federation with ADFS and federation with Ping Federer are two scenarios where you see the same thing happening. Azure Active Directory talks to Active Directory and performs the actual authentication in Active Directory itself, leveraging all your auditing, all your SIEM, all your IAM processes, your sale point, all that stuff still works, still there. Everything is in Active Directory and in Azure AD. And of course, you can always choose to do not configure, which is a very interesting option, which, well, we don't use that much. If you do that, if you enable Azure AD Connect, which is a free tool, and you sync up your user objects from Active Directory to Azure Active Directory, and you specify the authentication method, and there's loads of choices, I just told you, then what you get is your first stepping stone to passwordless. Now you can have sign-ins with the Authenticator app. No longer you have to use a password, it's just an Authenticator request that you approve. You pick a number from 3 numbers, that the number that matches the screen. Well, that's the good thing to do, or else you won't be logged on. And then you're just logged on. You no longer need a password for that. And of course, those fancy FIDO 2.0 keys work with Azure Active Directory in hybrid mode and Azure Active Directory cloud mode by default. I've got a couple of those keys on my keychain. It just works. I just go to my device, any device in my organization, I put in a key, boom, I'm logged on. It's that simple. And it's still multi-factor authentication, because I can only do that on devices that are company-owned. I can only do that by default on organizations' devices with a TPM chip. It's the device that I have that I add to the other device. I can't use that device anywhere else. And the first time I get there to that device, I have to provide a PIN. So the device is something I have, or can prove I can have. The key is something I can prove I can have. But I need the PIN, something I can prove I can know, to actually perform that multi-factor authentication. And every passwordless authentication is a multi-factor authentication. So think about that. All those users currently, and I work with admins mostly, if we do stuff in Azure Active Directory and hybrid identity and all that stuff, I see the people from the organization perform multi-factor authentication, well, probably 30 times a day. It's a hassle. And admins know, you know what? Most admins feel responsible for their environments. They say, you know what? Let's do multi-factor authentication. I'll take my responsibility and act like an adult. Users, not so much. So if we can make authentication more easy or easier for our users, safer for our users, that's something that will help security in the end. I'm not even gonna demo that because it's single sign-on. It's hard to demo the sign-on screen if you're presenting, but I am gonna demo the next thing that we're gonna talk about, and it's attribute-based access control with dynamic groups. So in Azure Active Directory, I can have groups based on attributes. So I can have a group with all the people that are hidden from the global address list, just like that. If I want to do that on-prem, I need Microsoft Identity Manager. That's another 3 servers that I have to configure, maintain, write off, stuff like that. It's built into Azure Active Directory. And then I can use those groups to, I don't know, assign licenses, assign applications, like Twitter. If you have your department name field in Active Directory filled out right, so with lots and lots of integrity, if you have your function attribute in Active Directory filled out with great integrity, you can just filter out those stuff. So even if you have a marketing liaison in department X, it still has marketing in the description field or in the function field or in whatever field. You can just still say, you know what, I'm going to give you Twitter too. So let's see how that works, because I've got a browser right here. Let me just show you. If you haven't seen it, this is Azure Active Directory in the Admin Center. It's aad.portal.azure.com. I use that because I don't get the pop-ups that the Admin Center wants me to use an app instead of the browser. This is all browser-based. I use Firefox with an extension that hides some of the sensitive stuff on the screen, which I feel is good. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in the, here's my mouse. In the navigation window, I'm going to Azure Active Directory, which is where all the fun stuff happening, and I'm going to groups. Now this tenant doesn't have any groups yet, so let's create one. New group. Security group is great. Office 365 groups are great too, because you can have teams and stuff like that already added, but please note, if you add people to an Office 365 group, I can see someone grinning already, they all get an email. Yeah, so please be very careful with that option if email is still a thing in your organization. The group name, we're just going to show Azure AD Premium, oh no, Microsoft calls it Premium P2. That's cool. License assignment, something like that. Well, I think that's a perfect description too. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a dynamic user group. You can also create dynamic computer groups. Dynamic user groups, and now I'm going to add a dynamic query. And you can add expressions, you can and or and stuff like that. But let's choose a property and let's choose let's scroll down a bit. User principal name, because I love that one. And I'm going to say, you know what, it needs to contain my domain name. And I'll show you why I choose this and not something else. And then I'm just going to say enter. And let me get that. Yep, now it's here. This is the actual LDAP filter that is used under the covers. So I'm just going to save it, then create it. It's going to take a while to get the members added. It depends on how many people need to be added. But if you look at users, what you'll see is that there's a couple of users that have that lucernepub.com user principal name suffix, but there's also a couple of them that don't. So I'm not assigning a license to someone that's, I don't know, doing some other stuff. Now let's go to licensing, because this is where we do the fancy stuff with the licensing assignment. I've got one product right there. Let's click on it. Let's go to license groups. And let's assign users in groups. There's only one, right? Azure AD Premium. There it is. Select. And then I'm going to say, you know what? I only want you to have the Premium P2. No, wait. I like MicroStation Multifactor Authentication too. And there you go. People will be automatically added to the group. People will be automatically assigned licenses. You don't have to do anything about that. If you use your names right for your groups, if you do the dynamic membership rule good, you can actually use that, all that stuff that I'm just showing you, as the basis for two of the other things that I'm going to show you. So let's get this back out of the way. Here we go. And let's get back to the presentation. Because if we're looking at access-based control, what we're seeing is that most admins are still stuck somewhere in 2003. We have a file server, there's a folder on it, there's a group on it. If you're a member of the group, great, you've got full control on the folder. I see some people cringe about full control. Right. That's not something that we do these days, but we're still seeing it. And after a pretty long night in Las Vegas, I came up with this slide. And I'm saying, you know what? This is basically what we have on premises. We have either a device, app, user, group, or collections from System Center, for instance. People can do stuff to a scope, which can either be a collection or a folder or whatever. And always is pretty much what we're doing there. If you have access to a folder, you can access that folder anytime you can actually log on. If you do not have log-on restrictions, you always have access. Furthermore, if you have access, ransomware has access too. Wow, I think attackers love that. So what can we do about that? Well, let me show you what Microsoft model for Azure Active Directory looks like. This is all the stuff that we can do in Azure Active Directory to Azure AD integrated resources. And let me be really clear about that. Don't just think about Office 365. Don't just think about Twitter. Think about your on-premises SharePoint too, because you can make that Active Directory integrated with the Azure AD App Proxy or with your web app proxies. All that stuff still works. If you have web functionality on-prem, you can put it behind the Azure AD App Proxy, and you can still use conditional access. And if you do, and if you enter this model from the left to the right, these 4 areas will be will be analyzed. So what's the user? Who is he? What groups is he a part of? What about the device? What groups are the device about? Is it hybrid Azure AD joined? Is it Azure AD joined? Is it compliant with Intune? Stuff like that. The location. Is this a location that we trust? Is this one of our own locations? And I think that's a silly one in the current way of thinking, because currently today, most organizations think, well, my location is a safe haven for devices. No, it's not. A physical location is only a trusted location if you actually do the hard work, like deploying 802.1x, or doing your onboarding and offboarding right, which most organizations just can't get right for some reason. But I am going to show you something that our Department of International Affairs really loved and is using. And of course, it is per app. So you can have all these rules per application, per group, per device group, stuff like that. And it gets evaluated through machine learning, and there's loads and loads of data per day pouring in to that, from breaches, from Microsoft account, so the personal account logons, and stuff like that. And it all gets mangled into a session risk. And based on that session risk, and based on all that stuff, and of course your conditional access policies that are combined into an effective policy, you either get allow access, require multi-factor authentication, limited access. You can do that in SharePoint. You can say, you know what, if you're in Thailand, you only get read access to this document library in SharePoint. You can do that with conditional access. Now try and do that on-prem. You can deny access, which is obvious, and you can force a password reset if the session risk is too high. And actually, that's built in. Everybody gets that stuff. Conditional access is really cool, but conditional access requires a premium license, a P1 license. So only one premium. And then, if you get that stuff, you can do fun stuff. But first we have to fill that funnel, right? So how do we fill it? How do we do stuff with devices? How do we stuff locations and stuff like that? So let's see about devices. There's 5 ways that you can join a device. And more what we're seeing is that organizations are using Azure Active Directory domain services, which is like 2 smoke and mirror domain controllers, using the Azure Active Directory database, and adding devices to that. But please don't. That's for servers only. And you'll find out that you'll be in an unsupported state pretty fast, because there's loads and loads of stuff that just isn't in Azure ADDS that you find extremely likely to be there, because you've had that feature for 20 years in Active Directory on-prem. Well, as I told you, Azure AD is not AD. It's AD-LDS from the start. Of course, AD domain join is the stuff that you all know. There's hybrid Azure AD join. So if I have a domain join device, I can automatically make it hybrid Azure AD joined. That means that device object that I have in Active Directory ends up in Azure Active Directory as well. So I just do all the normal stuff, bless you, all the normal stuff in Active Directory. My service desk people still know how to do that. And then all of a sudden, magic happens, and all these devices are in Azure Active Directory. Now I can use them in conditional access. Of course, you can also do Azure AD joined, which is cool for Windows-based bring your own device scenarios. And if you have iPhones and stuff like that, you can Azure AD register them. And it's pretty fun, because if you deploy that, and there's a big fuzz about that, because the latest version of Azure AD Connect seems to break this feature a bit. If you do not follow the guides or the how-tos to the letter, basically, then Azure AD Connect 1.4 will actually break some stuff in some scenarios. So there's Azure AD join. As I said, it's bring your own. And of course, we've got the hybrid Azure AD join. And you need to have a couple of things for that. So we start with Azure AD Connect 1.1.486.0, which is about 2 years old. So probably if you've ever deployed Azure AD Connect in the last 2 years, you're good to go. And if you run Windows 10 1607, sorry, wrong button, then you're good to go as well. Windows 10 RTM and 1511 need a group policy. It needs to be set to actually do the hybrid Azure AD join. But if you have 1607 or up, it will do it automatically. It will just assume that that just works. There's a button in System Center Configuration Manager as well for hybrid Azure AD join that overrules all the stuff that I just said. And of course, if you have Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 8.1, and actually the release notes initially said that it works on Windows Vista too, if you still have those, probably not. You can use the workplace join for legacy clients, and I've specifically added a link because they've renamed that stuff 4 times, and it's really hard to look for it. Wait, no, it's hard to look for it by me, specifically. So if you use Google, you'll probably find it. I use Bing because I think that that gives me the credibility of being an actual expert, because you can't find stuff to help you. You can use Microsoft Intune on top of Azure AD Join and hybrid Azure AD Join. So you can configure the hybrid Azure AD Join to do an automatic Intune enrollment. Now there's way bigger experts on Intune and Config Manager, probably even in this room, than me. So I'm just gonna show you how this works from an identity point of view. So you can auto-enroll to Intune. If you don't do Intune, what you'll see is that hybrid Azure AD Join and Azure AD Join are on-the-spot action. So if you upgrade your Windows 10, if you rename your Windows 10 devices, stuff like that, all those changes are not reflected in the Azure AD portal. And Intune just says, you know what, we'll look at the device, is it compliant, does it have a different name, all that stuff just works. So let's see how that works. Because we still have the Azure AD portal right here. Let me get a mouse. Yep, here we go. I go to Conditional Access. It's underneath Azure Active Directory as well. And here's the baseline policies. Baseline policies are awesome if you do not have Premium or Premium P2 licenses, because they're free. And they help you get to a next security level. But what we're going to do is, and I've already done something with named locations, I've got some untrusted countries right here, and I've selected 2. You probably know which 2. It's North Korea. Let me show you. North Korea. And the other one that we're not allowed to do business with is South Sudan. So I've added them to an untrusted countries. So let's create a new policy. Let's say users and groups. Let's say all users. And watch it, because this also means all guests. Let's say yeah, I need to be done. Sorry. I need to click done first. All users, done. Cloud apps or applications, all cloud applications, done. Conditions, locations, configure, yes. Selected locations. Here are my untrusted countries. Select, done, done. And I'm going to say grant, and I'm going to say block access. Select, enable policy. Don't lock yourself out. Okay, so exclude my current user, create. Oh, let's give it a name. Sorry. Here's your name. And right there, I've blocked access to every application, every feature that is Azure Active Directory integrated from North Korea and South Sudan. Under a minute. There's people in our Department of External Affairs that were doing this, upgrading IP ranges in ADFS regex claims, two guys, almost full-time, 36 hours a week. I did it under a minute, and it's updated, because Microsoft also does this stuff. So why, right? Cool stuff. And then there's identity protection. And I've already said it, but identity protection is always touted and always seen as an Azure AD Premium P2 license, but it's not. It's even available for free Microsoft accounts. You can just use it. Everything's gathered, everything's seen, everything's added to that machine learning funnel, and we all benefit. So if there's a Tor exit node, and if you, in your locations say, you know what, I want anonymous IP addresses to not be included, or I want it blocked, or I want them MFA'd, that's all coming from identity protection as well. If there's a breach, and Microsoft is notified of those breaches, it will actually try and see if there's users from your tenants, because every app uses email address, so that's easy, to see if they're in the breach, and if they are, then what they're doing is they're gonna allow people to change their passwords after multi-factor authentication. We don't have to do anything for that. Of course, if you do not have a premium license, what you'll see, or premium P2 license, what you'll see is that they contain less information and that they only go back 30 days only. There's a couple of reports that you can use, and it's really fun to get on top of all that stuff. We've just seen a holiday season, so you'll probably be able as an admin to figure out where all your colleagues went for holidays, and if, because we all sacrifice as admins, so we all go on vacation next month, right? So if you see someone that went to Costa Rica, for instance, and you say, well, that's interesting, let's ask these guys where they went and if it's a good hotel or not. So yeah, good feature. Automated and delegated access reviews. So we're now getting to the one page per feature part of this presentation. There's only a couple of features left, fortunately. But we have Azure AD Access Reviews. If you have Azure AD Premium P2 license, you can have application owners keep their permissions clean themselves. So what we're seeing is that now as an admin, we can just allow those guys to get rid of all those legacy permissions, people that did have rights but don't need them anymore. I mean, who uses Visio anyway? No, that's the big one that you can use right here. Get someone off of Visio. If you're not using it, who knows who's not using it? The manager. So let's see. Getting back to the portal again. Let me get my mouse. It's right here. And let's go to identity governance. Now this is a clean tenant, so I first have to onboard it. Yep, onboard now. Thank you. Onboarding should be done. Identity governance. Great. Yep. Here's access reviews. Let's scroll a bit down. And let's create an access review. It needs a name. There you go. A start date. A frequency. So how many times do we want those owners to be notified? Well, I think quarterly is just fine. We never end. Cool. 25 days is the period of time that they have to get their answer in. Then users to review. Well, let's get a group, and we've got a group. So let's use that one. There you go. Select. And reviewers, I want this done by my buddy. My buddy, here you go. Probably know him. Here he is. He knows everything about licensing. And I'm just going to start. So now what happens is that Jos is going to get an email and say, you know what? You're a reviewer for this group. In 3 months' time, he's going to get a new email says, hey, remember you were a reviewer for this group? These are all the people in there. Please tell us what you want to have done. And if we go back to the Access Review, what we'll see is that we can actually say how, it was in the advanced features, how we want the answers from Jos processed. Because we can say, you know what, Jos may answer all these questions, we're not going to do anything with it. Don't tell him, we just ignore it. And it's great from an onboarding, it's great for an awareness point of view, but you can also say, you know what, if Jos tells me that someone doesn't need a license anymore, it's fine, remove him. Or if Jos says, doesn't need it anymore, I as an admin will have the last say on that, and I will actually remove that in the same portal right here. And then, of course, because these were all features that we as admins really love, but we can also do self-service. So users can do self-service password reset. It's really easy to enable. It's one slide, you enable it. After you enable it, everyone that does a logon says, you know what, we're going to register for self-service password now, we're going to do an MFA enroll. Oh, cool. That's probably something you need to tell the service desk guys, people first. There goes the surprise, right? But it's cool, because now they can reset their passwords after initial registration. And don't get me wrong, 20% of typical IT budgets are blown on password resets and the improductivity around that. And there's cool stuff, so it's aka.ms slash SSPR, it's aka.ms slash register MFA. You can just communicate those URLs to your users. And of course, there's group management, and you can allow colleagues to create their own groups and add people to those groups. And you can have naming conventions and stuff like that applied, so it doesn't get some kind of mushy, I don't know what, that is uncontrollable. So really cool stuff that we can have people that are experiencing problems during the weekends still remain productive by just fixing stuff themselves. Or just contacting colleagues through WhatsApp or whatever and say, you know what, could you add me to this group? Could you give me a review? Could you approve of me joining your group? Stuff like that. So let's conclude this session. If there's one thing you do, if you want to use everything, every feature that I just shown you, just synchronize your objects. You benefit from one identity. It's single sign-on. It's painless. You can do all those conditional access stuff, and you get a head start on passwordless. And with identity protection, you don't have to worry about those pesky breaches. That I think the current number is about 2 per day, breaches where you users might be in. And of course, if we do the banned password feature, that unfortunately today we didn't have time for, you can actually say, you know what, my organization name is this, I don't want that word or the word welcome in any passwords anymore. It's cool. You can enable your colleagues, so you set boundaries with conditional access so they don't break the rule in North Korea or South Sudan. You can let them reset their passwords, and you can let application owners review the stuff. So if they have limiting budgets or stuff like that, you can just say, you know what, I'm just going to kick some people out. And of course, you can secure access to IaaS and PaaS-based resources by leveraging Azure AD-based role-based access control with those same dynamic groups. Easy. And with that, there's only 2 words left for me, and that's thank you.